Hi everyone, my name's Janelle Riley. I'm an editor at Variety, and I am so thrilled to be here today for this Q&A with what has become my obsession and probably yours, Atlantic Crossing. I'm going to be taking some questions from the audience during the discussion, so if you have one, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and submit one there, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. And now please join me in welcoming the people who brought this beautiful series to life. I want to start with the actor who portrays U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Please welcome Kyle MacLachlan.
Oh,
We also have joining us the actor who portrays the Norwegian Crown Princess Martha. Please welcome Sofia Helin. The show's director, scriptwriter, and executive producer, Alexander Ike. We also have scriptwriter Linda May Callistein joining us, and Masterpiece executive producer Suzanne Simpson.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you all so much for being here today. Congratulations on a beautiful series. I feel we should start with Alexander, who is the creator of the show, also obviously writer and director. How did you come to know the story of Crown Princess Martha, and what interested you in telling this story about this particular time?
well, actually, it started all the way back in 2011. I read this article in a Norwegian newspaper about Crown Princess Martha spending 5 years in America and having a very, very close relationship to President Roosevelt. And it just struck me that I didn't know actually anything about Martha at all. I hardly knew that that she stayed in America during the length of the war. And I was very intrigued by the speculations that there was a romantic relationship between the crown princess and the president. So I was really just curious, and I started, doing my own little research to try and find out more. And I just realized that actually it was really hard to find any information on Martha at all. She's a very obscure figure in Norwegian history, and that got me all the more intrigued, actually. And then I was lucky to have Linda on board as a co-writer, and together we started doing research back in 2012. And 6 years later, we started. Well, we were in the middle of writing the script. It took a very long time to find enough information to get to know Martha. So that's why it took such a long time. Yeah, so that's where it started.
You're making me feel a lot better because while I was watching this, I was mortified I didn't know this story. So I feel a little bit better knowing that it wasn't a wildly popular story, and you really had to research to get some of this information. And Linda, I'm
Yeah,
curious. Oh, go ahead.
no, it's fine.
Linda, what interested you in being a part of this series? And could you ever have imagined it would be 6 or 7 years of research when you started?
No, absolutely not. Sometimes it's good what you don't know ahead of time, but it was worth all the time. So maybe I would have even done it even if I knew that. Well, just like Alexander said, in Norway, this story is completely unknown, and I barely never even thought about that. We had a queen who never became a queen. She was a crown princess. She died very young in the 50s. So when I was growing up, Olaf, who was then the king, I never really thought about that there was a woman that was missing by his side. So for me, she was totally unknown, and people I spoke to had no idea anything about her either. So just going into the material and finding a little nugget here and a little nugget there, and then piecing these together and seeing that, you know what, there's a big story here. There's an untold story that probably because she died as young as she did, it died with her. And the stories of war are usually stories about men. So to find this amazing figure and a woman who played a huge part of Norway's war story, being that close to the president. I mean, who gets to be that close to the most powerful man on the planet? And we know that she spent more time with him than anybody else except for his advisors during all the war years. So they were extremely close and spent a lot of time. So the story's intriguing, and the more we found out, the more intrigued we became.
Suzanne, masterpiece is obviously synonymous with, beautiful quality productions. So Atlantic Crossing seems like the perfect home for it. But how did you sort of become aware of this project, and how did Masterpiece get involved?
Well, we became aware of it while it was in production. And it wasn't until I had a chance to actually see the first episode that I became totally intrigued by the whole thing. I had never heard of the story. I had never heard of Crown Princess Martha. It was so beautifully shot, and it starts with a real romance between Olaf and the Crown Princess. And so I was immediately intrigued. But just to do my due diligence, I had to find out from Alexander and Linda how much of the story was true and how much of it was fiction. And they gave me what was the most impressive look at what they had put together. And so then I became convinced this was really a story that our audience would love. I mean, it was beautifully done, something nobody had ever heard of, and had, of course, Kyle and Sofia as the leads. And they're both just spectacular. And I think Masterpiece likes to think of itself as a place where great writing, great acting, great production values, and this show had it all.
Absolutely. And obviously, this show doesn't work without the perfect cast. So I would love to talk to Kyle and Sophia about how the project found its way to you. And, was it an instant yes when you heard the story, when you read the scripts? Were you at all familiar with these events? And let's start with Kyle.
Oh, thank you. I was sent the script through the channels in Los Angeles through my agent, and was very intrigued with the story. Also, the idea of playing FDR. That's a kind of a mountain of an assignment, and I was very excited about it. I loved what I read. I loved the fact that the story focused on the family. I love the fact that it was also focused on a woman's journey, and really her finding her voice, and that Franklin was a supporter of that. I liked that dynamic very much. And in the conversation that I had with Alexander when we were first speaking on the phone, I recognized in him the kind of director that I would love to work with. Very thoughtful, very detail-oriented. And based upon the script, I also saw the Franklin that he and Linda created was someone that I identified with and looked forward to playing. He had a personality that I thought was really spot on. So all of those elements were there for me.
I can't get over how much you look and sound like him. Had anyone ever said to you before that you resembled FDR?
No, actually. I was, when I thought about it, I said, "Oh, actually, it could possibly work." And one of the questions, of course, with Alex was whether or not we do any kind of prosthetic stuff, and we decided pretty early on not to, and really just rely on the glasses and kind of the haircut and the attitude to convey the personality of the president of FDR.
Yeah, it's funny when I heard that casting, I was like, oh, yeah, of course, but I never would have thought of it on my own. So I guess congratulations to Alexander are in due.
Yes. Thank God.
And Sophia, what's
The feeling on that, just it was so intriguing to have Kyle coming to Prague in the pre-production and seeing him taking on the character, both mentally and physically. And it is a very physical role due to the character's physical condition, and he was in a wheelchair, of course. But I think Kyle really managed to. I mean, Kyle had, of course, done his own research before we met the first time, and studying Roosevelt's manners and how he was using his body and moving. And of course, we decided not to go for not to try and force an emulation, try to make Kyle be like a lookalike of FDR. We were more looking into a method where Kyle would do his interpretation through his own persona, and there somewhere, find the resemblance in a more organic way, a natural way. So, and I think Kyle really succeeded with that in a way that exceeded my hopes and expectations. And I guess you're right. He really does look like FDR in that role.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
Sophia, what about for you? Were you at all familiar with Crown Princess Martha? And as someone who maybe isn't as iconic and recognizable as FDR, were you able to draw on newsreels or anything to sort of, get a sense of her?
Yeah, I had never heard of her when Alexander pitched it to me. And that in itself was intriguing because he explained to me the role she played during the Second World War. And the other thing is that I, as a Swedish woman, I've learned about the Norwegian history, about the male heroes from the Second World War, and so on for years and for years. And now there was a story from another perspective. And that's always interesting to, if you want to tell a true story through as a drama, to me, it's always interesting to see, to get to know what kind of angle will you take, what kind of perspective do you want to show. And this so clearly wanted to tell her story. So that in itself was intriguing to me. And also that she was so unknown, also in Sweden. I mean, she was a Swedish princess to begin with, but I've never heard of her before. So, yeah, I instantly said yes to the question.
I mean, she was so ahead of her time in so many ways. There are so many things that occur in this series that feel so relevant today. I have to imagine you fell in love with her instantly.
Yeah, I did. Even though, I mean, we don't look alike at all, I think. And we had to make a choice early on if we wanted to put on, nose and teeth and so on. But and also the way she spoke was, because I listened to old tapes of her pronunciation of the Norwegian language and so on. So we made some choices to move away from really how she really looked like, but to focus on being close to me in order to get close to the audience. So that's always a question when you're doing a real person.
Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit more about the research, both for the cast and the creatives. Alexandra and Linda, you mentioned you spent over 6 years sort of researching the story. In that time, did you sort of imagine what it would be in the beginning, and then the more you learned, because sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, did it sort of change the story as you continued?
Yeah, I mean, we did write very early on. Yeah, I mean, almost immediately we started writing the script in 2012, but then we did it as a feature film. And we were having, we really struggled with that story because we just, the more we learned and the more research we did, the more the story just expanded. And to the point where the producer said that, it's never gonna work, because 5 years to compress that into a feature film, it makes the story so, compressed. And then we realized that, of course, it has to be a series. It has to be, 8 episodes, 8 hours instead of 2. So, but of course, the research process is like is detective's work, and especially when it comes to this story, because Martha was so unknown. There was so little written about Martha, and the few books we found about Martha, they were written by people who didn't really know her and who observed her from a very great distance. So to us as storytellers, we needed to get as close as possible. So we really did a very groundbreaking research on Martha. We went places and found stuff that never had been revealed before. And we had to puzzle all these pieces together. And of course, it was painstakingly slow. And well, I can only speak for myself, but I was, it really drove me crazy sometimes, that, if I had Olaf would call for his dog. And then I realized, what's the name of the dog? And then like 3 weeks later, I had the name of the dog and I could write Vimsa, in the script. It drove me crazy. But then again, we found these nuggets of gold. Then it was so rewarding. And as you say, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And we really found so many things through our research that we could never have made up. And that really made the efforts, it made it worthwhile.
Linda, was there anything in particular you discovered that really surprised you, caught you off guard, and ended up becoming part of the story? Or maybe it didn't because you weren't able to include it for whatever reasons.
I think what really got us started that was the most surprising that held throughout was her how conscious she was about helping Norway. That was the the forefront of her mind the whole time. We were in the presidential library, Roosevelt's presidential library, and went through the archives there. And that's the only place that we actually found any letters that she wrote by herself, because there's no other documentation. Her letters, if she had any journals or diaries, if they exist, they're not accessible by the public. And there, just to find some small little letters where she wrote to Franklin that, okay, my son is sick. And then at the same time, she would then go on to say, I'm sending you some clippings from a newspaper. And is this true? I hope you can keep us in mind. And please help my little country. So she kept appealing to him about her little country. She was very humble in the way she presented this. But like I said, in a letter where she's telling about the fever Harold had, and then all of a sudden she would do this jump and go into something political, something as a lobbyist. So what surprised me also later on is we came across an interview with a gentleman who had worked for the Norwegian Information Office. And he gave this interview, I guess, around 2000, 2002, when he was quite old at the time. And he had gone with the Norwegian ambassador home to Martha on a regular basis to feed her information, so that when she was at the right place at the right time, she could then just tell the president or whoever she was with that this is what's going on. So she was extremely on top of things. And this was all secret. There were no written documents about this. The ambassador and this guy, they snuck in when people were out. So even those living with her didn't know that this had happened. So finding things like that was like, yeah, we're onto something. And our sort of anticipation is this true? Like Alexander said, we kept finding nuggets and nuggets. And the thing is, too, it's frustrating because you find A, B, and then maybe E. And it's like, okay, where's C and D? What happened? And there's nothing. Or things that we had given up on trying to find a solution and answers to, and maybe 3 years later, they just magically appeared. It's like, oh, finally. And it was such a relief when you're digging and digging, and then you just give up. And then somehow you turn a stone, and it's like, oh, there it is.
I mean, for the actors, you can do all this preparation and all this research, but when you show up on this beautiful set in Prague and you put on the costume and the hair and makeup, how much does that really help you as an actor truly transform into that character?
Sofia?
Kyle?
And I'm yeah.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, Prague is beautiful. I don't know about Barrendorf Studios, but they were They were okay. Um, the research, and I'll just speak for myself, but the research, loved it. I couldn't stop really digging and sourced from a couple of places. And to be honest, there was an awful lot of information in the script that had already, a lot of work had been done already for me. And so once you have all that information at your fingertips, or you've absorbed it, hopefully, then of course you have to make the jump to make it your own. And so that's where that process and the working closely with Alexander as director, and then being in the scene, of course, with Sofia, and being able to really feel comfortable, I guess, kind of letting it all go and letting it all kind of hang out and hope that you were, in the ballpark. And I felt like we were all pretty consistent with that. And it was so helpful to have the eyes and the sensibilities of such a smart group of people around me as I was working on Franklin, and I felt that every day that I was on the set.
So, Kyle, I just want to mention that you said at one point that one of the things you used for research was Ken Burns' series on
Yes.
Roosevelt.
Yeah, that was an important one. They had gone through and sifted through a lot of the actual footage of Franklin moving and speaking, and as well with just many photographs, and so I was able to study the physicality of him, and from that kind of I guess distilled out what I thought his personality might be like in certain instances. I really gravitated towards a guy that loved to be the center of attention, could really tell a good joke, loved to entertain, great sense of humor, super smart, very witty, and that was all in the script. So I had a lot of fun with those scenes.
Sofia, what about for you? And on a superficial note, did you get to keep any of your costumes because they're stunning?
Yeah, they are stunning, but to be honest, I was very relieved to get out of it after so many months, 8 or 9 months in this costume but also after a while I could really feel the weight of being royal. And it was also in the clothes, the way I felt my body had to be pleasant and nice. It all, yeah, it affected me in that sense. So I was very happy to have a pair of joggers and a t-shirt on. But they are beautiful. I agree. But that is helpful because I thought a lot about, as I said, why do we tell this story about this woman and her journey? She made a political journey. She became active. She became not a princess to watch, but a person to act. And that was what interested me in this part. And that also has to do with the way she looked and the way she even had her own, design store in a very fancy place in Stockholm and so on. So she was very aware of her appearance, and also raised in Swedish Stockholm, in the castle. So she grew up being a princess, and to explore what that makes with how that affects a human being. That was interesting. And to feel when she met with Roosevelt, I imagine that must have been a relief to meet someone who is more famous or bigger and is that relaxed, and the American culture that was much more relaxed at that time than in Europe, and especially within the royalties. So I imagine it must have been a lot of fun, and at the same time, a lot of bad conscience for having the husband in London and for having your country invaded by Nazis. And it's a very complex situation. She was she was a refugee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Chemistry is such a difficult thing to define. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Alexander, I'm curious because this show does rely so much on the relationship between the Crown Princess and FDR. Did you do sort of any kind of a chemistry read with your two leads, or did you just know it would work?
Well, we didn't have the opportunity to do that on this particular series, but after having extensive talks with both the actors and together before we met physically, I never actually worried about that. I really didn't. It never struck me until you say it now. Oh my God, I was so lucky that worked out. No, it worked out so fine. Obviously, both Kyle and Sofia are very empathetic persons, and they were casted for these parts for a reason. I thought that was a very fundamental thing I would look for in these two characters, in the actors who were playing these two characters, that they had to be people's persons and have a lot of empathy and high EQ, social skills. Because Crown Princess Martha and President Roosevelt, they were both, they had people skills. They were both known for treating everyone they met equally, whether they were of high birth or if they were, normal people. And this is a trait that they shared, and also I think they shared a lot of other things. I mean, as Sofia mentioned, both being so famous, being these iconic characters, but also they shared the experience of living with a lot of physical pain, because they were both troubled by their physical bodies in their lifetime, and they both had to live with those physical challenges and still keep up an appearance and always show their best side to the world, while they could be in periods be suffering, really. And so they had a lot in common, I think, and I think they hit it off very early on, and they met the first time in '39 when Crown Princess Martha and her husband Crown Prince Olav were on a tour for, I think 70 days in the States, and I think they immediately became friends, because when Martha then comes to America 1 year later, after escaping the Nazis, she's there on invitation by President Roosevelt, and she actually moves into the White House with her 3 children. So that speaks volumes about how quickly they must have connected when they met in '39, and seeing that the president opened his home to this little family, and being so generous in helping them to find a home of their own, not far away from the White House, at Pook's Hill in Washington, D.C. I think they had a very, very close relationship without
But
speculating.
I can answer the question about the chemistry between me and Kyle. I mean, when you came to me, I had prepared for this role for quite a long time. And then when you said to me that Kyle was interested, I mean, I knew that it would work. I just knew. So, and if it didn't work, I would have made it work. So I don't think you needed to worry, Alexander.
That's great.
But of course, you never know.
No, you don't.
I was nervous after watching the bridge. I was like, "Oh boy, okay."
Yeah, that's a very different character. She's very straightforward and not so polite.
And I think that speaks to Sofia's skills as an actor, because in The Bridge, she plays a character that has, I think it must be the diametrical opposite of Crown Princess Martha. And
Absolutely.
comparing those two characters, I mean, it's hard to believe it's the same actor doing those two roles. I mean, it's incredible, really.
It is.
And-
I actually want to take some questions from. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I was so amazed that Sofia, you mastered 3 languages for this role, not just English, but your own, Swedish, but Norwegian as well. You had to learn a whole new language.
Yeah, I did. I mean, Norwegian is quite similar to Swedish, but the melody and many words are different. So it took a while, but I love languages and I had a lot of fun with it. And I think I was a bit funny to you Norwegians. You could laugh at me when I did some mistakes sometimes.
You did a good
That's,
job.
you have
You did a great job.
No, but I mean, it's not that easy as Sofia's. I mean, I think learning Norwegian as a Swede is much harder than you make it sound like now. And I think we were all really impressed by your diligence and how you managed. I mean, you had the opportunity to prepare for this role almost a year ahead of this shooting commencing. So you utilize that time and you learn a new language, and I'm still very, very impressed. And you shouldn't lose it to speak Norwegian to each other.
Yeah.
Next time to me.
Remind me.
Suzanne, that actually brings up a point. This show is slightly different from Masterpiece because it's not British. It was produced in Norway in several different languages. Was the process any different for you?
We don't often show Norwegian productions. In fact, I think this is the very first for us. And there was a bit of a question about whether our audience would take to the subtitles as easily, because really the first 2 episodes are mostly in Norwegian. But our feeling was just the story was so strong, and you definitely wanted to know what was going to happen next, that very swiftly you forgot that you were reading subtitles and just were kind of taken away by the story. So, and I think that's true because the show is doing extremely well for Masterpiece. We have a very big audience for it, and a lot of people are letting us know how much they love the show.
That's great. We have a question from the audience from Margaret T. Oh, it's a question for Kyle. Wants to know, with few exceptions, much of your work has seemingly entailed playing quirky, offbeat, or otherwise fringe characters, which is quite the opposite from the Atlantic Crossing role. What challenges or advantages, therefore, did you face playing a historically iconic leader shouldering such monumental responsibilities?
That had been in the description. I'm not sure I would have taken it on. That sounds very frightening. I did feel the responsibility to create him or recreate him, I guess, in a way that was responsible and truthful, and that's where the research is so helpful. And another source that I had was Doris Kearns Goodwin's book. She just wrote in great detail and used her own detective abilities as a writer to parse what really was happening in the psychology of the person. And that's where I started. and I just got drawn in and began to, you just use your imagination, right? What must it have been like to have been stricken with this? Where would you have gone mentally? What could have happened, etc. And then coming out the other side, what impact did that have on your personality and the way you look at life going forward? And that as an actor, I've got to say is, and maybe Sophia feels the same way. That's just really great, great stuff. That's kind of what I live for, is digging in there and figuring that stuff out. And when you have a real person, the only other time I think, I did Ray Manzarek in The Doors, and so you have an actual person that you can draw from, and I find that really, really challenging and fun. And I felt the same way about FDR.
Well, you've also played the mayor of Portland, and I don't know if you know how accurate that was, but that is actually, I think that's based on fact entirely.
Okay.
We have a question from Jenny G. This could be for Kyle or for the writers. She asks, FDR is portrayed as playful and romantic. Was he?
Oh,
Well,
I mean, I
sorry,
think,
go ahead.
yeah, no, I was going to just offer what he was a ladies' man, I think the term we'd use, and really enjoyed having female company around him, and also just witty banter. So they had to be smart, and I think you could give as good as you could take, one of those, and I think he really enjoyed that. One of the things that I think he enjoyed about Martha was the ability to sort of trade, nice back and forth, fun witticisms and comments, and I think he also appreciated her perspective, her point of view, coming from Norway and having experienced firsthand what was happening in Europe, and it was very much in line with the way he felt about how United States should ultimately needed to engage in the war, and come to the defense of Europe. His situation was such that he was leading a country that was very much opposed to any kind of foreign involvement. So he had a kindred spirit in Crown Princess Martha that was written so beautifully in the script.
Question for the writers. There's actually two questions, and they go together so well. I'm going to read them both. Marilyn G wants to know, what are the main areas of the storyline in this series that weren't technically historical and therefore truly fictional? And Deborah C asks, what were some of the dramatic elements added to the story which were not based in fact?
Linda,
Well, I could just say that, yeah, well, what went on behind closed doors were private matters. So we don't have that much information about what was said. I mean, there are some circumstances where people have reported and stuff, but we actually had to sort of think within the situation, what could have happened? I mean, what would be natural? So when it comes to Crown Princess Martha's relationship with her husband, they were separated by this ocean. He was in the middle of a war zone, basically. So we had to speculate on what would that do to a family being separated by war. He could, potentially be killed at any moment. She was trying to create a very safe, daily life for her children. So they were in totally different places emotionally. And what does that do to a relationship? What does that do to a marriage? As we already seen in the first two episodes, Olav was very frustrated. He wanted to help. He wanted to be active in helping Norway, and he couldn't. He was basically put on the sideline by his father. And you had Martha, who was in America, and she, started her journey as in a political sense. So that we made that up, basically, this, the tension between the two. But we felt it was plausible. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. Maybe I sort of downplayed it too much, Alexander.
No, I totally agree. But I also think where the story ventures furthest away from the actual events. I mean, we really strive to be historical correct with this story. But of course, when you compress 5 years of war history into 8 hours of drama, you have to make some tough choices. And I feel where we sinned the most, so to speak, is all the things we left out. It was so many things we wanted to. I mean, we could easily have doubled the number of episodes easily. But of course, the plot line with Eliza Forbes and her interaction with the Nazi saboteurs arriving from a submarine on Long Island. I mean, that is true, but the connection between the two, we made that up. But we know for sure that we found a letter from Roosevelt to Martha where he warns her about Eliza Forbes and says in the letter that she's definitely pro-Nazi and that she's a personal friend of the brother of the Nazi prime minister in Norway, Vidkun Quisling, and that Secret Service recommends that Martha and her lady-in-wait, Ragni, that they stay away from Eliza Forbes. So that we didn't make up. But the connection between her and the Nazi saboteurs, that is for sure something that probably didn't happen.
Well, just now when you mentioned that you could have doubled your episodes, I saw Suzanne's eyes light up. So if you wanted to do a she's right here, I'm sure she would greenlight it on the spot if I'm not speaking for you.
No, but just a fun fact, the script was around 450 pages. But at one point, just out of curiosity, we thought, let's just put all the unique scenes together and see how long will the script be. And it was 2,400 pages. So had a lot of material that we left out.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And that will be put into a book, I understand. Is that right, Linda May? So people will get the whole story at some point.
Yeah, I'm writing a nonfiction book based on the research material that we did. And I've also done some additional research because at some point when we had all those thousands of pages, there were certain things that we knew enough about. And it would have just been a terrible headache if we'd even found even more details about certain things. It was like, okay, we have to stop this line of inquiry and move on to other things. Yeah, I guess maybe that's my greatest regret about the whole thing. When Alexandra and I sat down and we saw that there were 8 episodes, we shouldn't have been so hasty to say it was 8. We should have just sort of gone a little bit with the material. And I'm pretty sure we would have ended up at least double the amount of episodes that we ended up being with. So, yeah, so there's more story to be told. And also when you have to cut out things, you still need to keep the essence of certain points that are important. So you sort of have to put together different situations and marry them to keep the historical aspect correct, in the meaning that something's important. It might not have happened the way we show it, but the whole idea behind it is true. And how do you then demonstrate that within the short period of time that we have? 8 hours sounds a lot, but it's not.
Kyle, you mentioned earlier that you identified in some ways with FDR, and we have a question from Catherine P. For the actors. Wants to know, in what ways did you find yourself relating personally to these characters? And that's for you and Sofia.
Wow. I did like his sense of humor. I enjoy a good banter back and forth myself, and so that part of the equation for me was pretty accessible, I guess. I like challenges, and I also was really intrigued with the idea of how to make the physicality of him work, and I worked a lot along with Alexander and our props department actually to fashion the devices that were actually that he actually used, and then also other little implements that gave the illusion of legs that were not functioning and that were really, really small when they were in a wheelchair. We weren't always effective, but I think for the most part, we came up with some pretty good ideas. So I like that part of it as well.
Sophia, what about for
Yeah,
you?
I could relate to the fact of being a mother. I'm a mother of 2 children, and have to travel a lot and leave them behind because of my profession. I could relate to her frustration that she had, Martha, when she had to go travel around America to talk about Norway and so on, and also the double loyalty between family and trying to save her country. And I mean, my situation is not at all like hers, but that I could relate to that stressful situation in that sense, that it's hard to be enough everywhere at the same time. Yeah.
It's such a wonderful series. I'm so sorry that we're out of time, but I want to thank our panelists for coming and for all of you for watching. Remember to tune in or stream Sundays at 9/8 Central. Check the website and social channels for content and updates. Episode 3 airs tonight. You really don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss any of them. I cheated. I've seen it all. So I'm telling you, it just gets better and better. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janelle.
Thank you.